I need to read the skill file first to check if front-end design guidance applies here. Actually, this is pure prose writing. No computer use needed. Let me write the story directly. The morning I found out, I was standing in my kitchen making oatmeal. My phone buzzed on the counter. A notification from Facebook someone had tagged a photo from my son's wedding anniversary party. I hadn't known there was a party. I picked up the phone, and there they all were. My son and his wife, laughing with their arms around each other. My daughter standing next to them, holding a glass of something sparkling. My grandchildren, all 4 of them, sitting in a row on a porch swing, wearing matching outfits someone had clearly planned in advance. My son's in-laws filling the rest of the frame. Everyone dressed up. Everyone smiling. I stood there in my kitchen with my oatmeal getting cold, and I counted the faces in that photo 3 times. Mine was not one of them. It wasn't a small gathering. Looking through the other tagged photos, I could see at least 30 people at that house. Balloons, a catered spread, a banner that said 10 years and still going strong. My son and his wife had been married for 10 years, and apparently everyone in both of their lives had been invited to celebrate that, everyone except the woman who had paid for the wedding itself. I put my phone face down on the counter. I finished making my oatmeal. I sat down at the table and I ate it slowly. Because I am 63 years old, and I have learned that the first thing you should do when something knocks the wind out of you is breathe. Then I opened my phone again, and I looked at the photos one more time just to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding something. Maybe it had been a surprise party and they hadn't been able to reach me. Maybe there had been a miscommunication somewhere. I scrolled through every photo. 30-something guests. A planned menu. A custom cake. This was not something that happened by accident on a Tuesday evening. This was organized. This was deliberate. And I had not been included. Let me tell you something about my son's wedding, because I think it matters. 10 years ago, when he told me he was getting married, I was genuinely happy for him. His wife seemed fine, quiet, a little guarded with me from the beginning, but I chalked that up to nerves. I told myself she just needed time to warm up. I told myself I would be patient. The wedding budget came up about 3 months before the date. My son sat across from me at this very kitchen table, and he laid out the numbers. The venue alone was going to be more than I had ever spent on anything in my life outside of my mortgage. He wasn't asking me directly. He was careful about that. He always has been, but he laid the numbers out in a way that made it very clear he was hoping I would step in. I stepped in. I paid for the venue. I paid for the catering for 112 guests. I paid for the flowers, because my daughter-in-law had very specific feelings about flowers. I bought my own dress, I paid to have my hair done, and I stood in the back of that church with tears in my eyes watching my son get married, and I thought, this is what you do. This is what a mother does. You give everything you have because you love them, and you want them to have a beautiful life. I never once asked to be thanked publicly. I never brought it up at the reception. I paid and I let it be paid, and that was that. And now, 10 years later, I was looking at photos of an anniversary party I hadn't been invited to, held in my daughter-in-law's parents' backyard, surrounded by people I had never even met. And I was trying to understand where I fit into the picture of my own family. The answer, apparently, was that I didn't. I should explain something about how things worked in our family, because this didn't start with the party. The party was just the day I finally let myself see clearly what had been true for a long time. About 4 years after my son got married, he and his wife decided they wanted to move into a bigger apartment. The one they were in was fine, 2 bedrooms, reasonable rent, close to his job. But his wife had decided she wanted something with a yard for the dog, and a dedicated home office, and a neighborhood that was, as she put it, more their vibe. The new apartment was nearly $800 more per month than the old one. My son called me. He said they were a little stretched. He said it would just be temporary, just until his wife's freelance work picked up. He said he hated to ask. I started covering $300 of their rent every month. That was 4 years ago. The freelance work never quite picked up enough, and the $300 became a quiet, permanent fixture of my monthly budget, transferred on the first of every month without anyone ever mentioning it anymore. Then there was my daughter. My daughter is 37 years old, and she is the reason I know what it feels like to love someone completely and still not be able to figure out how to stop enabling them. She went through a divorce 6 years ago, which was genuinely hard, and I was there for her in every way I knew how to be. I let her move back into my house for 8 months. I watched her children 3 days a week so she could work. I paid off a credit card debt she had accumulated during the marriage because I didn't want it following her into her new life. When she got back on her feet and moved into her own place, I was proud of her. I thought we had turned a corner. Then her car broke down, and rather than finance a used car through a dealership the way any adult would do, she came to me. She said her credit wasn't good enough to get a reasonable interest rate on her own. She said she just needed my name on the loan. She said she would make every payment herself. She made the first 4 payments herself. After that, I started getting notices. I paid off the car, all of it. I told myself it was a gift. I told myself I was helping her rebuild. I put it in a drawer in my mind and I closed the drawer. The problem with drawers is that eventually they get too full to close. After I saw the party photos, I didn't call my son right away. I spent 3 days sitting with what I was feeling, which is something I've had to learn to do in my 60s because in my 40s I used to just react and then spend weeks apologizing for the reaction. I went for walks. I talked to a friend from church who has known me for 22 years and who has a gift for listening without steering. I prayed, in the way that I pray, which is more like a long, honest conversation than anything formal. And somewhere in the middle of that 3 days, I started to really look at my finances for the first time in years. I don't mean I was unaware of my finances. I balanced my accounts. I knew what was coming in and what was going out. But I had stopped letting myself look at the full picture, the total of what I was carrying for other people, because every time I started to add it up, something in me would redirect. I'd think about my grandchildren, or I'd remember my son's face at his wedding, or I'd think about how hard my daughter's divorce had been, and I would close the drawer again. This time, I didn't close it. I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, and I wrote down every recurring financial obligation I was carrying for someone else. The $300 a month for my son's rent. The car insurance I was still paying on my daughter's car, the car I had paid off because she had gotten behind on it and I had picked it up rather than let it lapse. The phone plan that had 4 lines on it, mine, my son's, my daughter's, and one of my grandchildren's. I had added that line 3 years ago as a birthday gift, and it had simply stayed on my bill. The money I sent my daughter every month that she called borrowing and that we both knew was not a loan. The groceries I bought when I watched my grandchildren that somehow always included stocking her refrigerator. When I added it all up, I was carrying over $900 a month for people who had not invited me to a party in my own family. I looked at that number for a long time. Then I picked up my phone and I called my son. He answered on the second ring, cheerful and easy the way he always is when he doesn't know anything is wrong. We talked for about 3 minutes about nothing, the weather, something his youngest had done at school, and then I said, very calmly, that I had seen the photos from the anniversary party online. There was a pause. He said he was sorry I had found out that way. He said it had been his wife's idea to keep it small, just close friends and family, and things had gotten a little out of hand in terms of the guest list. I asked him if he considered me close family. Another pause. He said, of course he did. He said it was complicated. He said his wife had some feelings about things that he was still working through with her. I asked him what feelings, specifically. He didn't answer that directly. He said that he loved me and that he had been meaning to take me to dinner to explain everything. He said he didn't want me to be hurt. He said it in the gentle, careful tone of someone who has been rehearsing the conversation. I told him I appreciated that. I told him I needed some time to think and that I would be in touch. Then I called my daughter. My daughter's reaction was different. She didn't apologize. She said she had known about the party and that she had agreed with her sister-in-law that it would be better if I wasn't there because, and these are her words, I have a way of making things about myself at family events. I did not say anything for a long moment. She said she loved me, but she needed me to hear that. She said she had been wanting to say it for a long time. She said she hoped we could have a real conversation about it. I told her I appreciated her honesty. I sat with that for the rest of the day. I turned it over and looked at it from every angle I could find. Was there truth in it? I searched myself genuinely. I thought about every family event I could remember in the last several years. I thought about whether I had dominated or inserted myself where I wasn't needed or made things harder. What I found, honestly, was that I had worked very hard at most family events to be useful and unobtrusive. I had been the one setting up and cleaning up. I had been the one managing the children when the adults wanted to talk. I had been the one quietly making sure everything ran smoothly so that everyone else could enjoy themselves. The idea that my presence itself was the problem landed differently when I put it next to the reality that my money had never been a problem at all. I thought about that for a while. I thought about $900 a month. I thought about a wedding venue and a florist and a catered reception for 112 people. I thought about a car loan I was never paid back for and a credit card debt and 8 months of someone living in my house and 3 days a week of childcare. I thought about my daughter telling me I make things about myself. And then I made a decision. I didn't make it in anger, which I want to be clear about. I had 3 days of processing behind me before I did anything, and by the time I acted, what I felt was not rage. It was something quieter and more final than rage. It was clarity. I called my phone carrier first. I removed my son's line and my daughter's line from my plan. I left my granddaughter's line because she is 14 years old and none of this is her fault. I set it up so their service would end at the end of the billing cycle, which was 11 days away. Then I called my bank. The $300 that had been going to my son's rent was set up as a recurring transfer. I canceled it. The woman on the phone was very pleasant and asked if there was anything else she could help me with. And I said, "No, thank you. That was all." I wrote my daughter a short email. I told her that I had heard what she said and I had thought about it carefully. I told her that I was going to take her advice and stop inserting myself into things that didn't seem to involve me. I told her that the financial support I had been providing was one of those things and that I would be stopping it at the end of the month. I kept the email very calm and short. I reread it 4 times before I sent it. It said exactly what I meant and nothing extra. Then I went to bed and I slept better than I had in months. My son called 2 days later. His wife's family had a group text, he explained, and apparently someone had noticed some charges weren't going through the way they expected. He was a little flustered. He asked if everything was okay with my accounts. I told him my accounts were fine. He asked if the transfer had been stopped accidentally. I told him it had been stopped intentionally, and that I should have done it a while ago, and that I wished him well. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, and I could hear something shifting in his voice, moving from confused to something else. He said that he hoped I wasn't doing this to punish them for the party. I told him I was doing it because I had looked at my finances honestly for the first time in years and realized I had been spending money on people who did not seem to particularly value my presence. I told him that I was not angry. I told him that I genuinely hoped he and his wife would figure out their budget and that I believed they could because they were both capable adults. He said it wasn't that simple. I told him I knew it wasn't and that I was sorry for whatever inconvenience this caused and that I loved him. Then I hung up. My daughter called that evening. She was not calm the way my son had been. She said I was being vindictive. She said I was proving her point about making things about myself. She said she couldn't believe I was punishing her children by removing their mother's financial support, though she had just told me days ago that her financial support was her own responsibility and that she was capable. I let her finish. Then I told her that I had listened carefully to what she said to me and that I agreed with her. I told her she was right, that she was an adult and capable of managing her own finances. I told her I had been slowing that process down by removing the natural consequences of financial decisions. I told her I was sorry I hadn't seen that sooner. She said that wasn't what she meant. I told her I understood, and that I loved her, and that I had to go. I didn't answer the next 4 calls. I responded to each one with a text that said I needed a little space and would reach out when I was ready to talk. I kept the texts short and warm. I was not trying to wound anyone. I was trying, maybe for the first time in my adult life, to make a decision purely based on what was right for me and then stand inside it without apologizing. The phone situation resolved itself in a predictable way. My son got his own plan within a week. It turned out to be very simple once there was no other option. My daughter called the carrier to understand why her line had been removed, and then she called me again, and I told her calmly that I had made some changes to my accounts and that she was welcome to get her own plan, which she did. About 2 weeks after I sent the email, my daughter showed up at my door. I opened it. I had known she would come eventually. I was not afraid of the conversation. She looked tired. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where I had added up all those numbers, the same table where my son had laid out his wedding budget 10 years ago, and she looked at me for a long moment before she said anything. She said she didn't understand why I was doing this. I told her I thought I had explained it in the email. She said she meant why now. She said things had always been this way, and I had always been fine with it. I told her that was probably the most honest thing anyone had said to me in months. I told her she was right. Things had always been this way. And somewhere along the line, I had decided that being needed was close enough to being loved, and I had confused those two things for a very long time. She didn't say anything to that. I told her that I loved her. I told her I loved her children and I would always be in their lives. I told her that being a grandmother was the best thing I had going and that nothing would take me away from those kids. But I told her also that I was 63 years old and I had some money saved and there were things I had always wanted to do that I had put off because I was busy covering other people's expenses. I told her I was going to start doing those things now. She asked what things. I told her I had been wanting to go to the Pacific Northwest for 20 years. I told her I had looked up a small inn on the Oregon coast and I was going for 2 weeks in the fall, by myself, and I was very much looking forward to it. She looked at me like she was seeing something she didn't quite recognize. Maybe she was. She asked if we were okay. I told her we were, as long as we were willing to build something real instead of something transactional. I told her I didn't want to be someone she called when the car needed fixing or the bank account ran short. I wanted to be someone she called because she missed me. I told her I thought we could get there if we were both willing to be honest. She cried a little. I handed her a box of tissues because I had known she might cry, and I had put them on the table. I did not cry. I had done my crying in private, in the 3 days after the party photos, when I had finally let myself feel how lonely it is to be the person everyone counts on and no one thinks to invite. My son took longer. He and his wife went through what I imagine was a difficult few weeks when the rent differential came out of their own account for the first time. He called me once in what felt like genuine distress, and I listened and I sympathized and I did not write a check. He called once more a month later, calmer, and we talked for almost an hour not about money, but about actual things, his job and my garden and a book he'd been reading. It was the best conversation we'd had in years. His wife has not called me. I don't expect her to. That is a bridge with more work on it than either of us may be ready for, and I am at peace with taking it slowly. I went to Oregon in October. I drove the coastal highway with the windows down, and I stayed in a small room that looked out over the water, and I ate breakfast alone every morning at a table by the window, and I read, and I walked, and I sat with the sound of the ocean. For long enough that something in my chest that had been tight for years began, slowly, to loosen. I called my daughter from the coast on a Tuesday afternoon, not because I needed anything, just because I wanted to tell her the water was beautiful and I was thinking about her. She sounded surprised to hear from me. Then she sounded something else softer, I think. She asked me to send pictures. I did. There is something I have been thinking about since all of this happened, something I want to say carefully because I don't want it to sound like I regret the years of giving. I don't. I gave because I love my children and I would do it again under different circumstances. But I think there is a version of giving that is really a way of making yourself indispensable because you are afraid that if you are not needed, you will not be wanted. I think I was doing that version for a long time. I think I taught my children, without meaning to, that I was a resource to be drawn on rather than a person to be known. The hardest thing I have ever done is stop. Not because it hurt them, though it did. for a while, but because stopping meant I had to sit in the uncertainty of whether they would still want me around if I wasn't useful, whether my son would still call, whether my daughter would still come to the door. They did. They do. Not perfectly, not all at once, but they do. And I am learning, at 63 years old, on the Oregon coast and in my kitchen and in the slow work of rebuilding honest relationships with my own children, that being wanted is better than being needed. That love without strings is a different thing entirely than love with a price tag attached to it, even when you are the one doing the attaching. I still help them sometimes. When it is real help for a real emergency, I give without hesitation, because that is what a mother does. But I give it differently now. I give it as a person who has other things in her life, other plans, a trip she's looking at for next spring to see the wildflowers in Texas Hill Country, a painting class she signed up for on Wednesday evenings, a friend from church she has dinner with every other week. I give it as someone whose life does not depend on being given a role in theirs. My phone stays on the counter now, same as it always did. Sometimes it buzzes with a photo from my son, his kids doing something funny, a view from a hike he took over the weekend. Sometimes it's my daughter sending a voice memo that goes on too long and ends with her laughing at herself. Sometimes it's my granddaughter, 14 and dramatic and wonderful, sending me videos of her new hobby that I don't fully understand, but that I always watch all the way through. They don't need me to keep the lights on anymore. And somehow, that is the first time in a long time that I have felt certain they actually see me.